Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots. Bootlickers, shills, deathslight, serfs, peasants, vassals, number counters, bullshitters. I'm a useful idiot, and I want to talk about the casualty counts in Syria. So I read a really interesting article, and it brought up a lot of really good points, and it made a lot of sense to me. And the conclusion it comes to is that these figures we see about deaths in Syria, 60 to 70,000, could be extremely exaggerated. And these numbers are used for political purposes. And of course, in the Syrian situation, it's used to whip up a frenzy and support for war and intervention in that country. And no surprise. I mean, this is how propaganda works. This is how the manipulation of public opinion works. This is how wars are started. So that's just the name of the game. So let's look at some of these facts. So casualty counts during modern wars have become highly politicized business. Although these numbers can be used to alert the world to the scale of violence, it can also, like in Syria and Iraq and Darfur and the Democratic Republic of Congo and elsewhere, death tolls have been routinely manipulated, inflated, or downplayed, a tool for the advancement of political interests. And I completely agree with that assessment because we look at Iraq as well. The numbers are manipulated in order to massage public opinion, whether it's the body count of U.S. troops or whether it's the claims of how many so-called militants have been killed and all the like. And we saw that in Iraq. We also see it in Afghanistan. And that's just another tool in the propaganda game, unfortunately. Isn't it a shame that even the bodies of the dead and the non-existent dead are used as a propaganda tool? So a good example of this is the exaggerated numbers of the Libya operation. This is what surprised me the most as far as body counts being used as a propaganda tool. The Libyan government now says only about 5,000 people were killed on either side of the Libyan conflict. Think about that, only 5,000 on either side. And that may seem like I'm downplaying a large number, but that sounds pretty small compared to the tens of thousands cited to justify intervention, or the 30 to 50,000 deaths claimed by opponents of the intervention. So just another example of how the numbers can be twisted for both purposes, both by anti-war activists who don't really have the access to the true numbers or hear what they want to hear, or certainly the interventionists who fall prey to the same mechanisms. And what a good question to be asked too, and it says U.S. and British governments can't account for accurate body counts even in Afghanistan and Iraq, their own invasions, their own occupations, and yet has accurate accounts of the body count in Syria. That's a very good question. And examination of media reports and actual documentation in the country is greatly at odds. Of course, when the UN was questioned, they replied, quote, "We can't prove most of these people have died," unquote. So these numbers are basically pulled out of thin air, or based on dubious accounts, to be sure. And this is a really interesting fact to me as well, too, that the UN Casualty Analysis Project, this is the organization that has given us these body counts for Syria, hires a company called Benetech to do their analysis, and this company, Benetech, is partially funded by the U.S. State Department. So no wonder they come up with a body count that feeds into the needs of U.S.'s instability project going on in Syria. And the UN Casualty Analysis Project also has an interesting quote. They say, their spokesman said, quote, "We were not asked to do verification of whether the casualties are real or not," unquote. So nobody's taking responsibilities for these numbers, even the organizations that have provided these numbers. And another part of this story that is problematic is the characterization of this scenario as essentially about a brutal regime killing peaceful civilians. So not only is the body count used to depict Assad as this brutal regime that is massacring civilians in the streets, the numbers are exaggerated, but also the very nature of the casualties. The UN's own report has statistics that bear out that most of those killed are clearly of military age and characterized as combatants. And the internal Syrian numbers reflect the exact same pattern and shows them as armed men. So, so this characterization of these civilian slaughter going on in the streets is a little exaggerated as well. Plus, as we know, a lot of the casualties that we're seeing are perpetrated by the rebels themselves, and there's all sorts of smaller conflicts going on inside Syria within the context of the larger conflict. So that also makes things more complex. And, you know, let's compare this to the comparison to U.S. collateral damage, where if you look in Pakistan, the 2,000 people killed and a lot of civilians and women and children in order to get to a number of insurgents. And so one could suggest the Syrian government is only doing the same thing. And then you add also the layer of the nature of where all of these casualties come from. When you get into the details, of course, it reveals a far more complex situation, once again, than the Assad Syria regime slaughtering people in the streets. It's civilians certainly targeted by the regime through shelling and airstrikes, with a lot of collateral damage, not unlike the airstrikes used by most Western powers. And then we have civilians targeted by the rebel mortars. We have improvised explosive devices and urban bombings. We're seeing all these kind of terrorist bombings going on now, which is the work of the rebels and other bad actors. And then we have crossfires, just like in any war zone. And then there's sectarian and political killings being perpetrated on both sides. So these situations of chaos give lots of opportunity to take out old grudges and have turf wars. And so we have all these different factions, and we have all these different propaganda wars going on. And so I guess the bottom line, reading this material, the bottom line for me, this is the fact that we're headlining numbers that are unreliable and easily politicized. And it's easy for these numbers to be used to incite and escalate a conflict. And in this case, it certainly is. I had a commenter get on one of my videos where I suggested there was some very complex issues going on in Syria. I mean, he used this number to lambaste me about 60,000 people being killed in Syria. So anyway, I think people should be a little more cautious that they are so certain of things they couldn't possibly be sure of. And these numbers and these body counts coming out of Syria is a good example. Just like everything else, they're propagandized. There's probably a lot of exaggeration and a lot more complexity about where these body counts come from. So, as usual, just try and look at the information that's provided and not necessarily have an emotional reaction, and get down to the numbers. As my friend Bertley says, let's follow the money. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.